Some of you might have seen me on TV making a lot of noise about education. Others might have read me on Twitter. And my frustration has been that people can't understand what I'm saying. I don't blame them. But the other thing I notice is that when I try to explain the problem, people say, yeah, and then they repeat the exact opposite of what I said. So then I started wondering, where is the disconnect? Why is it that I say something and people are not quite getting what I'm saying? And this is the conclusion I arrived at, and I'm going to explain it, why I thought this. I thought that the biggest problem is the stories we tell. It appears that in the Kenyan imagination, the facts don't matter. So even if you tell people this curriculum came from business people, it was rejected by many countries, Kenyans say, yeah, how sad, and then the next minute they say, but this curriculum is going to give our children jobs. So I decided, let me try and see if I can get to the root of where our education problem is. Who tells the stories that I am talking about? The stories that I'm going to talk about are told by the government, the church, the media, the school system, and the public. When I'm going through, the market or passing by transport, places where Nduthi guys are, I'm so fascinated about the way they speak to each other because they have conversations about political life, but the conversations are being informed by what they are hearing in the media. So for me, that's an issue. So even innocent conversations in the marketplaces when we have weddings or family events, even the conversations that we have about education in these informal spaces are posing a big problem to helping Kenyans understand what is wrong with education. So the stories I'm going to talk about are mainly by the four players that I have put there: the government, the church, the media, and the school system. And then I'm going to say how we process them as the public. Why are stories so effective that the facts don't matter? And one reason is because stories are the links between facts. If I tell you, for example, that 10% of young girls are getting pregnant before the age of 18, you remember that 10%. But if I start telling you, many girls are living in poor families, they don't have an income, when the schools are closed, they have nowhere to go. When I tell you all those other stories, you don't remember as well as me telling you 10%. The 10% sticks in your mind, but the story that I've told sort of passes you, and you absorb it, but you're not aware that you're absorbing it. And that's the second point, that we consume stories less consciously than we consume facts. So you will remember the fact that I tell you, but the story behind that fact, the story that links the fact that I've given you to your own life, is what you don't hear, unless you're really paying attention. And this is why I think literature is so hated by the political and the business class, because they don't want us to connect the facts that they are telling us. They tell us one fact here, and we are never able to put the two facts together and ask, by the way, why is this happening and this is also happening? Because we don't consume stories as consciously as facts, we tend to forget the stories. Also, stories are all round. Stories are psychological, historical, philosophical, they are entertaining. Because all these needs are being met by stories, you're not able to analyze and say, hey, wait a minute, what am I being told? And then stories, of course, are colorful, because if I give you a name and a place, you remember it better than if I just, spit out facts that this and this happened here. And then stories take more work to spot. What has been happening with education is that there are certain stories we are being told, but Kenyans are not analyzing the stories, they are analyzing the disjointed facts. So they are told, oh, your kids will get more jobs, oh, gig economy, which means they won't get jobs. And Kenyans are not able to put those two facts together and say, wait a minute, how come I'm being prepared for jobs but at the same time I'm being told I will not get jobs. The inconsistencies in stories are harder to spot then when you have facts. Inconsistent facts are fairly easy to spot, but inconsistent stories are harder. So the first story that I'm going to tell is about employment, and then there's also the future and parenting, which I will come to. So these are the stories we tell. I'm sure you've heard this one. So many vijana, yeah, mwisho wa kusoma utapata kazi nzuri sana. By the way, this song was composed before independence. But the story that we keep on telling, and we keep on repeating this, is that education used to be for employment, but now there are no more jobs. And we always refer to this song as proof that long time ago there used to be jobs if you went to school. Then the second story that is told a lot is that employers are complaining that our undergraduates are unqualified. Who have heard that one in the media? We are always being told, half-baked, yes. The graduates are half-baked. What are we wasting our time with education? What is wrong with this system? And then the other story is that this is the one which I just find so crazy. On one hand, we are being told we are changing to CBC because the employers need a certain kind of graduate. But on the other hand, we are being told if you enter CBC, you should not expect employment and you can get a job if you have talent in something else. It's psychological manipulation, because imagine being told, we'll take you to Mombasa for a job, but if you don't get a job, ujisort. That's what we are being told. And parents are thinking, I don't know, it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to me. But this is what history tells us, and here's where I go to the economy. Before colonialism, we had no need for employment. And very few Africans were interested in going to school. So it is not a standard thing that education is for employment. And in fact, part of colonialism was to make employment necessary. The reason why we didn't need employment was because we were getting food from the land, we were trading with our neighbors, and not even just neighbors here, but elsewhere. I mean, we were going across Africa. My father tells me that his grandfather used to go to Somalia to trade. So we were trading elsewhere, very far. So there was no need for employment by the Wazungu because we were making a living, we were feeding ourselves. So the job of the colonial government was to force us to be employed. By who? One was the settlers. Because think of it, if you grab some land at the White Highlands, 5 acres, or let's say 20 acres, you're just one white man. You want to grow enough food for yourself and to trade with and to export. You need other hands to work on your shamba so that you have enough goods to export. Where are those other hands going to come from? It's going to come from the Africans. So what do? We do poll tax, hat tax. Not only do you deny Africans access to land, but you tax them, and you say the only way they can pay taxes is with cash. Where are they going to get the cash from? From the settler. So you have forced employment on the Africans. And I'm going to go to 2 historical events that show this dynamic. One in around 1914, I hope everyone has now heard of Mekatilili or Menza. The war that Mekatilili was leading, the Giriyama in, was a war about the Giriyama being dispossessed of land and the land being used for sisal. And then, because the British needed soldiers for the First World War, they wanted to come to the community and get men to not only work on the sisal shambas, but to also fight for on behalf of the British in the First World War. That was what her struggle was about. When they imposed the taxes on the people, the Giriyama came up with an ingenious system. When the British would come to be paid to ask for tax, expecting that the people would have to give up their men to go and fight or to go to the sisal plantations. The Giriyama had the taxes to pay. Where were they getting from? They would go down to Mombasa, trade there with they would take staffs to Mombasa, trade there, come back with cash. When the British came, they would find cash there and the taxes were paid. The other way in which the Giriyama resisted before the military war was that whenever they had the British conscriptors, the people coming to look for soldiers, whenever the British would come to the community to get soldiers, the men would disappear. So they would just not be there. So when the British come to the village, they come to look for young men, there are no young men. So this is what frustrated the British, and then the British saw that these people are so strong and they are so clever, we need to break their spirit. And that is when they bombed the kayas. The kayas are the caves which are of spiritual relevance to the community. That was when they bombed the kayas, and that's when the Giriyama said, we've had it. And they fought. So that story is a very complicated but very nice story about how the colonial economy comes to impose itself on a community, and that the community first finds ingenious ways to get around it, and eventually the colonialists realized that their resolve came from culture, and so they attacked the culture. Okay, that's 1914. In 1938, there was what is called the Destructing Controversy. Some investor from South Africa decided to build a slaughterhouse at Athi River, and he got the help of the Machakos DC. But also, there was something puzzling the British about the Wakamba. It was that, again, nobody was coming for employment, and they were getting nervous that so many young men in the Ukambani area who are not being employed in the cash economy might become a political problem for the British. So the British decided to get the men out of the community by imposing employment. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because the medium of exchange was cows. So if you're getting married, you pay dowry with cows. If you're paying a fine for something you did wrong, you pay with cows. Whatever transaction you're doing, you use cows. So the British saw that the way to break this economy and get the young men to come to work for the British is by dispossessing them of their cows. So the Machakos DO, I don't know if it's DO or DC, passed a law saying that everybody must get rid of their cattle. And he had made a deal with this South African investor that they would buy out the cattle from the community at a very cheap rate, and of course this investor would slaughter and export the meat abroad. The people refused. They went, they camped at Athi River. The government refused to listen to them. They walked to Nairobi. And they camped there and they stayed there for 6 months. And eventually, the British saw that if these people stay longer here, we are going to have an insurrection. So they considered and stopped the destocking law. So these are two stories I'm telling you about how colonialism came to force us to be employed. I hope you see that I'm driving at the fact that we shouldn't be asking for employment. To ask for employment is to be a slave. But that's what now we are saying, oh, we want education to employ us. And yet our ancestors have been fighting against employment. And there's story after story after story of this kind of manipulation of economic forces to force people to be employed. I'm going to start doing some research soon on the Trans Nzoia, Bukusu area, because I hear that was the same thing that was happening. I think a similar thing is now happening in Leakey, where they are trying to make the pastoralists stay in one place, because movement for colonialism is very threatening. It means you have freedom, you have experiences, you have all that. So they want to stop pastoralism, not simply because of the land or the cows, but to paralyze people so that they are stuck in one place and they have to keep waiting for handouts. They cannot go from place to place in search of an income. I've given you 2 examples of resistance, which was all over Kenya, of being forced to be employed. But the crunch now came in the 1950s. Up to the 1950s, the British they would fight and lose, and that was it. But when the Mau Mau War started in the 1950s, the British by now had started to read the signs of the times, and they saw that they have to decolonize. They had no choice. So there was one, that they had to decolonize, but two, also that they had to break the Mau Mau resistance. If they were going to decolonize and hand over Kenya to people who were sympathetic to their interests, they had to make sure that there's a significant number of Kenyans whom they have trained to think like them. And that's when the schools increased in the 1950s. The schools, especially in the Mau Mau, the central province, of course, they increased, but the idea was to create a middle class to whom they would hand over the colonial state, and then that middle class would now become the people who would forward British interests in Kenya after independence. So the schools, I hope you're getting my point here. The schools were not for liberation. The schools were to continue the colonial system and to break the resolve of Kenyans against colonialism. So that's what history tells us about the education system. So how do we understand employment? Please be patient, I'm getting to CBC. How do we understand employment? In a functional society, the way we work, we have to have access to the fruits of our labor. I hope I'm not sounding so technical. So I have here the image of a doctor and a patient. So in a normal working relationship, the doctor treats the patient, makes decisions about what treatment she's going to give the patient. She makes decisions about how the practice will continue. Will she expand the practice, go with join with other doctors? All these decisions are made by the doctor. So that is normal. If we put it to farming, it's the same thing. If I'm a farmer, I should be able to grow my food, be able to sell it at a price that I want, and then decide where am I going to sell it. What is the next thing for me in farming? That's what a functional economy does. What colonialism does is to put a separation between a person and their work. So, in other words, now a doctor is not treating the patient and making decisions about the patient directly. There's an interruption. Or a farmer grows the food, but they're not the ones who decide where to market it, how to market it, what price to sell it at. All those decisions are being removed from the person who produces the food. So that middleman is your favorite institution called the government and the corporations. Their job is to make money within the process. So they are parasites, as Violet says. What the government does, and I'm sorry to say, this is not about attacking anyone, but what the institution of the colonial government does is to make money from processes that are already happening within the community. So, for example, if I keep giving lectures like this and maybe 10, next time I have 100, the next time 200, then a parasite will come and say, oh, you're not marketing yourself very well. Do you need a marketer? I'll collect the fees. I'll collect the fees for you at the door. I'll give you a cut like that. That's how they operate. So even for farmers, the farmer grows the food and then somebody comes and says, no, it's me who decides where you're going to market and how much I will give you back. That's the role of the colonial government. So if you think of it in the colonial sense, instead of me having a transaction with somebody else and paying with cows, what the government did was to interrupt that transaction, impose the cash economy, and then now control us using money. So the patient has to pay this middleman. Then the middleman decides how much he will give the doctor. And not only how much he will give the doctor, then they start deciding how the doctor will treat the patient. So it no longer matters what the doctor's professional opinion is. It's the middleman who decides how that is going to happen. That's what colonial education is. This education which you're getting, that's what it is. It's for creating a class, a middle class. It's a middleman class. And the education system is for training people so that when you come out of the system, you go to work for the government and you impose licenses, regulation, policy, privatization, and we are taking our kids to schools to become these middlemen. Of course, the jobs are not enough. Of course, they are not enough because the economy is designed not to have enough jobs. That's the way it's designed. So even for these politicians and civil servants to tell us that the problem with the education system is that it's not creating jobs, it's not designed to create jobs. It's designed to create parasites, people who will just be getting money from the work of others. And they'll be paying themselves more than the people who are actually doing this work. For the longest time, we professionals, especially people like lecturers, doctors, engineers, we never saw this problem because there were not enough doctors, so to speak, in the economy. So the government was willing to train more and more doctors for as long as we stabilize. The point is to stabilize the economy, this extractive economy. It's not to help Kenyans. If you see from my picture, you can see that the patient is outside of that system and the doctor is outside of the system. What we are training for is in the space in the middle. We are training marketers, journalists, sorry if you are journalists. I mean, lecturers to continue the system. I'm not employed to educate, I'm employed to pass on the next few people who will survive the system to perpetuate it. That's what colonial education is. I don't know if I'm making sense. And this also explains why we have more taxes, more regulation, so much privatization, and even more corruption. Because, you know, you can't have too many people outside of the system who are unemployed. So as the government has to absorb more people to keep them quiet, then the government has to also put more taxes, licenses, policy, and privatization, so as to keep the middle class quiet. So that's the colonial education system. It's not for employment, and even if it was for employment, we don't want employment. It's exploitation. We can talk about that later. So, is education for employment or not? That's a question we must decide. If it's for employment, I'm sorry, take your CBC, be quiet and happy. If that's what education is for. And I kept telling parents, to say that you want education for employment is to disadvantage your child. You're not helping your child. You're turning them into a slave. But anyway, so we need to make up our minds about that. The next conversation I want to talk about is the future. And it's interesting that Mushai talked about it because part of why we accepted CBC is because of our beliefs about what the future is. Aki hii ni uchawi, please, people. Wazungu says something and then we believe, oh, that's the next thing that's coming, we have to adjust. Come on, it's witchcraft. Imagine it's witchcraft. So, in fact, when I started noticing, it was my students who told me, I told them, I don't understand why you people are accepting such a bad education system, because when you're told gig economy ni kibarua. These people are just keeping on changing the names, but the system is the same. Kibarua. Do you know what kibarua is? Maybe most of us don't know. Kibarua is the contract work. Somebody from Kibra might be working at an industry in industrial area. For 1 year, they keep going to work, and instead of getting a permanent and pensionable job, so that they have health care benefits and a pension, they are given a 1 year contract, and when the 1 year contract is about to expire, they are given another year contract. That's what kibarua is, and that's what gig economy is. And me, I was shocked to hear middle-class parents asking me how to prepare their kids for the gig economy. Are we serious? Like, really? You don't want your kid to have health care and a pension and a livable wage? I don't know how that we can be that ignorant. And then when I asked my students that, they said, well, but you know, it's the gig economy, that's where the world is going. No, that's what private sector wants so that they pay you less. It's a desire, it is not a prediction. But the way we treat private sector, it's when they say, oh, digital is going this way, we believe. That's uchawi, it's witchcraft. Because it has nothing to do with anything, they're just voicing a desire. This semester, I'm teaching Shakespeare. That tells you already a lot. So one of the plays Shakespeare has written is Macbeth. And those who know the story of Macbeth, it's basically the same thing. Because Macbeth meets 3 witches who tell him he's going to be the king. And then they tell him that his best friend will not be king, but his sons will be king. And it so happens that when Macbeth is coming home, no, he's first told he'll be a chief of somewhere. I can't remember the name. It so happens that when he's returning home, that chief is deposed and he is appointed in his place. So Macbeth says, oh, then what the witches were saying is true, that I will become king. And the rest of the play is this obsessive desire by Macbeth to make the prophecy come true. Do we know whether the witches were right? They probably were not right. But just one coincidence makes Macbeth go mad, and he starts trying to implement the predictions that he was given by the witches. So he kills the king, and then he tries to kill the family of the friend who was predicted would produce the sons who would be the next king. That is what the colonialism is doing to us. We are hearing, Sidri Bill Gates says, oh, Africans will drop like flies, and then Taikagwe starts trying to make sure that that doesn't happen. He doesn't ask, well, how did this guy predict this? What is his interest in predicting this? We don't ask those questions. So gig economy is by private sector. They don't want to pay your children pension. They don't want to pay for health care. They don't want to pay for all those things. They want to exploit your kids. And instead of you saying, no, they deserve a living wage, you're telling them, let's help prepare our children for exploitation. Come on. The other story we tell is about industrialization. Oh my God. Any basic colonial history, you know why the Wazungu came here. It was to get raw materials for industrialization. We were colonized for industrialization. How are we believing that we can industrialize on the same terms as they did? We can't. Come on. I mean, if we are going to do industrialization like them, who are the Africans to colonize in that arrangement? It's EPZ, for example. Now even the government is trading with our labor. They are selling us. Maritime, they are selling us. Doctors and nurses are being sold to the UK and to wherever. I mean, so we cannot be talking about industrialization as a model for development. It was the same industrialization that colonized us. We were colonized to provide resources for their industries. So unless we are saying that some Kenyans will be exploited in the same way, we need to forget about that industrialization and start asking about a new economic logic. And then this digitization of work is another con. It's a con. Oh, we are being told, oh, the jobs are going, they'll no longer need people, and all the jobs are going to robots. That's rubbish. Are your kids going to be taught by robots? But actually, the ambition of CBC is to put your kids in front of laptops and then leave human teachers like me for the rich. That's the ambition. Of course, they are not going to tell you that. They never tell you the truth. In fact, we were just talking with Violet. They see very far ahead. They know they can't tell you that from now on, grade 3 onwards, you'll be taught by laptops. Which parent will agree? So they tell you it's digital skills. I don't know, this. And by the way, I suspect even the people at the Jogo House didn't even know. I suspect they didn't know. So I've told you about the narratives about the future. These people tell us the world is going this way and we accept because we think Europeans control our future. But you see, this is a very old story. We were told, get saved now because heaven. You better prepare yourself now because heaven is waiting for you. And we believed, some of us. The other story we were told is progress and civilization. You're being colonized for progress. There's this future that we Africans are not part of, and the only way we can be part of it is if we are colonized. Now we are being given gig economy. We are sacrificing our children for a gig economy, and we are feeling, oh God, I better not be out of the gig economy. The other one is future of work. So the West, one of the things they have done so well, because even up to the Chinese, they really believe these stories, that the West has a special access to the future that the rest of us don't have. And we have to start asking that question. When somebody tells you, this is where the world is going, ask them, how do you know, as who, and what are your interests in the future going in that direction? Because this is how the West has hypnotized all of us. When they want something, they tell us this is where the future is going. And this is where Bob Marley was very wise in that song of his. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear of atomic energy, because none of them can stop the time. That's about time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. They've got to fulfill the book. That's the future, isn't it? You're controlling people by saying, if you want to be in the future, do what we are saying now. We have to really think about that future story. Basically, what I'm saying is, to keep people addicted to employment, we are told that the future is inevitable. So we are being told future of work, digitization, what. Those things are not inevitable. We all have access to the same future. We have to start taking control of that narrative and saying we must accept. We accepted CBC because we believed that the economic predictions were inevitable. When people said fourth industrial revolution, I asked them, on what basis are you saying fourth industrial revolution? I never got an answer. The other one is data is king. That's a lie. Data is king is just saying we are going to have a lot of data and many people are able to pay for it. But does it determine anything? No. Data does not make decisions. People do. Even Huduma number, who are told the same thing, that's where everything is going. We have equal access to the future as anybody else. So we also need to take charge and start deciding where our future is. We can't keep on listening to Europeans. Future is not a definite time. That's what John Beatty said. It's not a definite time. The past is definite. Meaning, I woke up in the morning. It's definite. I did wake up in the morning. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I am talking to you now. That is a definite time because it's true. I'm talking to you. But tomorrow, what will I be doing tomorrow? It's not definite. I have plans. I would like to do certain things, but it's not definite. That's why Europe has colonized the future. It has colonized our ability to talk about the future, so that we are always feeling that we have to fit into somebody else's agenda. That's how we got CBC. All right, the third narrative is parenting. Oh, this one sold. Middle class. Oh, Jesus. This is a story we were told. Parents are the best nurturers of the child. It sounds very harmless, isn't it? It even sounds like common sense. Of course, if you're a mother of a newborn, you are the best nurturer because when the child is so young, they need breast milk and they need food and they need to be, carried and everything else. Of course, the parent is the best nurturer at the point. But wait your kids reach teenage, you middle class people. You will discover that you need more than yourself to raise your child. And it's such a... It's such a European colonial idea that only parents, biological parents, raise children. It is not true. In the colonial documents, like Napoleon, who was colonizing Africa at the time, what he said is that part of the transformation of Africa includes transforming the family. You have to make sure the wife stays at home. Hear me, eh? So those of you who say housewives, the African women were housewives before employment, that's rubbish. Women were always working. They were at the markets, they were growing things. They were not housewives. This idea of housewives, a woman staying at home and a man going to be employed, is a European idea. And you can see, after I've talked about employment, why they wanted that idea. They wanted the women to stay at home and the men to go and work for the European. And the women were now feeding the children from their work. And this man, because he's being underpaid, there's no money he's taking home. So that's the structure of the economy. And funnily enough, we are just there repeating how African women were never employed, they were housewives. It's rubbish. So when CBC came, this is why you bought it. And this is what you bought. You bought that parents are solely responsible for whether their child succeeds in the education system or not. Surely, people, how can you swallow that? So basically, when you are told parental involvement, they're not going to tell you this, what I'm telling you. They're going to tell you things like, oh, you know, the parents wanted to be involved, so now we have parental involvement, which was a literal interpretation of parental involvement. When the parents said they wanted to be involved, they just wanted to know what their kids are doing. But how did the government interpret it? They said, oh, the parents want to do the homework with the kids. Come on. Come on. But what is so dangerous about that parental involvement idea is that how your kid comes out of the system is your responsibility and yours alone. How is that even possible when you have no say in the education system? If you didn't even determine the curriculum, how can you accept such a bargain that however my kid turns out, it's solely my responsibility? I tell you. So the second thing is that you should only care for biological children. So if you didn't give birth to children, you shouldn't care how they turn out. And for me, I was refusing that. When I spoke, I was refusing. I was saying, I'm a Kenyan, all children are my children. That's what I know from African culture. All children are my children. I cannot say, oh, I don't care how these people are being educated because that's not my child. But you see, the European idea of nuclear family has destroyed our ability to care about the education that other kids are getting. And immediately you don't care about the education others are getting. You're basically saying you don't care about the education your kid is getting. So this is the reality that we know. Come on, people. Let's wake up. We are not nuclear family people. The village raises the child. If you want to walk fast, walk alone. But if you want to walk far, walk together. Come on. Why are we accepting these very individualistic stories about our families? I mean, look at, we have extended families. How many people are paying fees for a cousin, a niece, whatever? We are paying hospital fees. We care for the rest of the family beyond our biological kids. Initiation is not done by the parents, is it? It's done by somebody appointed by the community. Dowry. If a woman is getting married, it's not the father who negotiates. He appoints somebody, isn't it? So these values are there in our communities. We are living them. But when it comes to the education system, we are told be individualistic and we accept. Parental involvement is based on a very selfish nuclear family idea. And if we accept it, it means that we are compromising the education for everybody. Education is one of those things you can't be on your own. Good education has to have all of us. What am I saying? I'm saying that we cannot understand what is wrong with the schooling system unless we understand history. And notice I didn't say our history. We have to understand history. We have to understand why the Europeans came here. We have to understand why they make what their system was. But also we have to understand what we did. How did we react? How did we resist these forms of exploitation? Because if we don't understand what is wrong with employment, if we don't understand what is wrong with the idea of the nuclear family, which is preached to us by the church, if we don't understand what is wrong with this idea of people coming from abroad and telling us, this is where the future is going, you better comply. If we don't get those fundamentals, imagine it doesn't matter how many facts I show you that there's something wrong with the system. You won't believe me because you're protecting these other stories that you're being told. So those are the stories I'm challenging us that we have to debunk. Otherwise, I can tell you about CBC till I'm gone, until but you won't hear what I'm saying because these stories have remained intact. Thank you very much.